Meanwhile, the Congressional Budget Office set to score Ted Cruz's Obamacare fix. Now, this is the one that calls for open-ended premiums. In other words, you can get coverage that can mix and match your needs, that you don't have to subscribe to the rules that are one-size-fits-all with Obamacare and get covered for everything that isn't important to you. It's meant to entice younger workers, younger Americans in general, to sign up for this at a cheaper price and have more people sign up, period. The trouble is that not everyone in leadership is flipping over this because it's such a departure from the Republican Senate measure that's out there already. That would include Mitch McConnell, who seems to be once again at loggerheads with the guy who had just a few years ago called him a liar. Doug Holtz-Eakin, the former CBO director during the George W. Bush administration. Doug, there's so much going on here. I don't have time to get necessarily into the politics of it, but on the surface, the idea of allowing people to pick and choose the kind of plan they want and the kind of things they want, not a one-size-fits-all, would seem to be a very Republican idea. So what's the problem here?
I think the problem is mostly the fact that they're trying to do this in so-called reconciliation, and the handcuffs that those special procedures put on them make it the case that while you can create these rules for people who are not on the Obamacare exchanges, you have to also sell policies that comply with the Obamacare rules on the exchanges. What that'll probably do is split the pool into two pieces. A piece that will buy these nice new policies, they'll be cheap, they'll be the young invincibles, but left behind will be the older, sicker workers paying very high premiums on the exchanges, and that's the downside to this approach because you can't do it for everybody.
All right. Now, a lot of people want to separately score this, so obviously that means it could have some potential traction, but if it fails, whether you like Ted Cruz or not, I would imagine they're back to repeal and replace later. Is that right?
I don't think they're going to go back to that. Remember,
Really?
that was the original plan. That's what McConnell had him. That's what he had in mind. The president then said, no, we can't do that. We have to do repeal and replace in one step.
They could have gotten a lot of this done out of the way, the drama of it out of the way, and beyond the things like tax cuts, and they missed an opportunity.
I think they missed an opportunity, no question about it. They started out with one strategy, switched in midstream, and they've had trouble ever since, and you can see it. So, now they're looking for a silver bullet late in the game, and quite frankly, I don't think there is one, Neil. There's not a provision you can write that's going to unite Republicans in the Senate. They're simply going to have to decide whether they can unify for purposes of passing a bill, advancing the president's agenda, and going on to things they want to do, like tax reform.
All right. Now, I know you're a numbers cruncher extraordinaire, and I think you've told me in the past that the CBO is only as good as the data it gets and trying to extrapolate from that data direction over the next few years, 10 years in this case. So it's not a matter of the CBO not being up to snuff. It's just the only game in town, and it's taking variables that could change. So it's numbers in, variables in, numbers out, variables out. Having said that, though, the view seems to be that fewer Americans are going to have health insurance 10 years from now in the Republican plan than would be the case with the Affordable Care Act. Now, that didn't shock me insofar as if you take away the mandate or the demand, the requirement that you have to have insurance, naturally a lot of young people are going to opt out. What it also leaves out is the fact that still more people than today are going to have insurance, just not as many as if you're stuck to the Affordable Care Act. So how is it that Democrats have gotten the advantage of this argument?
Well, I think the key is that Democrats always want to have the battle be about coverage. I mean, they have proven with Obamacare itself that they will write infinite amounts of taxpayer-financed checks to cover people.
Even if deficits get worse, and they get better under both plans. All the Republican plans, deficits shrink, costs shrink. They're not ideal, but that's ignored. It's all about those who have coverage, isn't it?
Yes, and if you look at the Republican plans, what do? They take the opposite approach of Obamacare. A, they get rid of the taxes and regulations so the economy is stronger, not weaker. B, they make the deficit smaller so the debt problem begins to be addressed. And C, instead of creating new entitlements and expanding old ones, it reforms two major entitle programs. They do that in the House, they do that in the Senate. Those are enormous advances, but all that gets talked about is the coverage. That's the way Democrats like to fight this battle.
As a numbers guy also, on the tax cut thing, there's a camp in the Republican Party that says make them big, make them significant, a lot of bang for the buck, you'll lose revenue in the near term, deficits, debt could get worse in the near term, but the money will come pouring in later on. Are you in that camp or in the deficit neutral, revenue neutral, whatever, budget neutral camp?
I think we know from all the evidence that permanent tax reform is more powerful than a temporary one. So I'm in the camp of permanent. And if it takes revenue neutrality to make it permanent, then I think they should go for that. They should dynamically score it. They should do it in a principled way. But they really want to get a big reform that gives powerful incentives to invest and innovate and employ people in the United States. That's the #1 priority for Republicans this year in the Congress.
But you could interpret that to mean if it's revenue neutral or whatever, and even if it is under the guise of tax reform itself, revenue neutral by definition will not be a big tax cut, right?
It depends on how you do it, right? You and I both know you need the growth. So you do the dynamic scoring, and traditional static way of looking at it, it'll look like a tax cut. But because the revenue comes in, it can be treated as revenue neutral under the rules. And if you look, for example, at the House plan, it's the only example we have at the moment, that's a big tax cut for people. There's a big middle-class tax cut. There's a big increase in the standard deduction. And it's a very powerful pro-investment reform on the business side. It's those kinds of combinations that I think they need to be effective.
I always learn a lot having you on. Thank you again, my friend. Very good seeing you.